The issues discussed on the Roll Call Room podcast do not reflect the opinions of any specific agency. Any characters discussed on this show may be fictional for comedic value unless you're a shitbag Steve. This podcast is rated explicit and listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to the podcast that changed the game and rocked an entire profession. Talking about shit in law enforcement that keeps poor leaders up at night. When others run scared and hide behind fake policies, the Roll Call Room podcast tells it like it is. No bullshit. No matter how hard these Steves try, we keep killing it. And now, here are your hosts, Nick and Mark.
Let's start, then we'll
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dave, so much for telling me about that, because it's been oozing this green ooze. And every time I urinate, oh, shoot. Welcome to another episode of the Roll Call Room. I am one of your hosts, Nick, diseased, and with me is the very handsome Mark the Cop.
Mark the Cop. Welcome to the Roll Call Room, and we have the one and only Dr. David on with us.
Good evening, Nick. Good evening, Mark.
I just went from 6 to midnight just hearing that.
give us a Dr. David give us a Dr. David growl there. Give us one of them. Yeah, there you go.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. We're going to have to wrap this one up.
So we have to address that we look a little bit different this evening if you're watching on YouTube. And the reason why is Nick is where are you at, in Vegas? I mean, you looks like you're in a hotel room
somewhere. I'm in a hotel room, and this guest is so important to us that we're doing these. I'm doing it remote, and you're doing it from your studio, the beautiful Shield Within studio. So we have Michael Segrue coming on. We're really excited, author of Relentless Courage. So we've been really excited about this interview, so we didn't want to delay it any further. We being Mark and I, were such shitty co-hosts that we canceled on Michael a couple of times. And, he was gracious enough to reschedule with us, so I made it a point while I was away on business to do this, or else I would not be recording on a headset in a hotel with a bed in the background.
Man, what I wouldn't give right now to see some hooker walk across the back of your screen.
Stay in the bathroom. Stay in there.
Shut up.
I'm really mouthy lately. I don't know.
You must be in a hotel that takes pets.
You want to make? I'll throw this at you.
Dr. David said, "You must be in a hotel that takes pets."
I do. So without further ado, we're going to go right into our interview. We're really excited, and we'll see you on the interview.
Welcome to The Shield Within. The issues discussed on the Shield Within podcast do not reflect the opinions of any specific agency. They are the views of the host and the guest. Any persons discussed may be fictional for comedic purposes only. This podcast is rated explicit and listener discretion is advised. Listening to The Shield Within may trigger, repress, or suppress memories or experiences. Please contact a mental health professional at your earliest convenience. It's time for the chaos to cease.
Time to open yourself to peace.
From the hours you've put in.
To the next shift you begin.
From the endless pursuit of release.
That finds the worst unleashed.
Transform the ugly into a win.
Get to know your shield within.
Welcome to the Shield Within.
Welcome, Mark.
I just want the listeners to know you're getting ready to have a kick-ass fucking show right now. We have the one and only Nick from the Roll Call Room,
What up?
What up? The man, the legend. And we're going to be interviewing Michael Segrue from Relentless Courage, who's the author of. So we're super excited about that. David, you have a whole thing of questions ready to go?
Points to go, you bet. Things
Nick,
to explore.
Ready to do the...
I love it. I love Dr. Dave questions. I love it.
So do I. So before we get started, let's do a little bit of business. If you're on Facebook, and we know you are, we're looking for those likes. So everyone get out there and like our page. We're almost up to the 400 mark. So Facebook / A Shield Within. Or you can go to our website, www.shieldwithin.com. You can go on there and pay homage to Hedgehog Donnie. If you're in need, reach out there and hit that coaching button. You can reach out and touch Dr. David himself. Well, I mean, not physically touch him, but you can he can be your sensei, or you can be his client. If that doesn't work, you can go to lessonslearnedcoaching.com. So one other thing, we're also on Patreon. So Patreon / The Shield Within. Pledge your support to the show. And kind of the project, what we're going to be doing with Patreon is it's not going back into our pockets. What we're looking to do is we're going to find a charity like our good friends at Saul, Chip Terry Fund, or whatever. So when we get up to our goal amount, we're going to be making those donations. So Nick and I talk all the time. All of us talk all the time. What's the number one problem right now? It's police suicides.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do about it?
Right.
And so what we've decided here on the Shield Within, and what we're going to do about it is start supporting the people who physically are out there every day. So
awesome.
All right. Without further ado, let's get into this.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with our interview. We are super, super excited to have Michael Segrue on. Really, really excited. We're going to get right into it. We got a bunch of questions. Dr. Dave has a bunch of questions. I've got a bunch of questions. But Mark was jumping the gun before we hit record. I always like to point out other people's mistakes so that I look good. So, Mark, go ahead.
I'm trying to adjust my lighting here, so go ahead and take it over with. No, we're super excited to have you on. We've been kind of doing hit and miss with this interview a few times. You know, I had a scheduling conflict. I think Nick did. So I'm really excited we were able to make this happen this evening, and I appreciate that you're on the West Coast now, right, Michael?
I am. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
There we go.
Ooh, nice, nice.
I'm in Ohio, and Nick's in an undisclosed bunker somewhere. So it's super secret. You know, he has that new undercover job at Adam and Eve now. So little joke from the last show.
I'm at a lubrication convention.
Isn't that in San Diego?
No comment. No comment. So I'm actually gonna kick it off.
Okay, go ahead,
Mike. You know, writing a book, I've written quite a bit myself. I know it's a very, very difficult task to do when you've never done one. What was the catalyst? What was the deciding factor for you that made you sit down and write this book?
Actually, I owe it all to Dr. Shauna Springer, my co-author. So to go back, actually right before COVID happened, I didn't know Doc Springer, but she was on LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn. She had seen some of the work that I was doing as far as my advocacy for post-traumatic stress injury and suicide prevention and whatnot. And she just wanted to set up a phone call to, like an intro phone call to see what I'm doing, see what she's doing. So I agreed. And she started the conversation off to tell me about stellate ganglion block, which is primarily what she deals with now. She's a chief clinical psychologist for Stella, and she works with doctors all over the world with this specific procedure. And then I went into my story. I kind of told her what's in the book, going all the way back to childhood until present day. And at the end of that, she asked me, she's like, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, I kind of laughed a little bit. I said, I've thought about it. I've been asked this before. I said, but honestly, I'm just burnt out, like with post-traumatic stress injury, with 20 plus years of report writing. I don't think I have the drive or the concentration or focus to get something like that done. And so we left the conversation at that. A few weeks later, she hits me back up and she's like, look, She's like, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of trauma stories in my work as a clinical psychologist for the VA, Veterans Affairs, and Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. She said, but your story is going to help countless people. And Doc Springer she wrote one book by herself, actually 2 books by herself, and teamed up with another author. So she'd done 3 books. And she said, I want to make this book happen for you. I want to do this project with you. And not even having met her in person, I knew in my heart that she was the right one to do this with. And so we started it, and then COVID happened, and literally we did Zoom meetings every single week for a couple hours at a time, and came up with this project. And we didn't meet in person until over a year into this project. And so cool. Doc Springer is really the catalyst for this whole thing. And she's an instrumental part of this book. And she is, I should say, we are living proof of the collaboration between a culturally competent clinician or therapist and a first responder.
Yeah.
Dr. Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you before I ask another question, and I'll hog this whole thing up.
I got a few things that came up. I very, very much enjoyed listening to the book, Michael. There was a lot more power in hearing your voice tell your story. Yeah. And again, Doc Springer telling her reflections, having you each say all that in your own voices to me was really powerful. Very easy to listen to. I think the average person, much like you said in the interview with Chris Luttrell, anybody can pick up Relentless Courage and relate to it. There's just the stories of difficulty in terms of what your job demanded of you, and then the things that you went through to make yourself well. That whole set of stories is like anybody can listen to that. I mean, my career started by working with sexually abused children and adolescents, and I did that for decades. And so by the time a first responder walked into my room and said, "Hey, you need to help me," part of what Shauna talked about on the show, and part of what I know that you went through in your mind before you started therapy, and maybe even with a couple of people that didn't connect with you, was you were concerned about how your content would be shocking to the therapist. You would come in and need to tell a story and your experiences, but that would just blow the person out of the room. And I thought that was really an important thing to think about when thinking about a therapist. We're strong advocates for trying people out. You're not just going to walk into anybody that you find in the phone book and it's going to work. Right. So one of the things that you said that struck me really strongly was you were just concerned about that person being able to handle the content that you were sharing. If you could talk about it about that a little bit, I think that'd be helpful.
Absolutely. I can speak to my personal experience and also through the work that I've done with like West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. But, I've heard horror stories time and time again of first responders who have gone through their EAP program because they didn't want to go through the official channels. And they get basically, a listing of therapists in their area. These are just random therapists. And none of them have any background whatsoever dealing with first responders, veterans, or anything like that. And they go into these offices, as difficult as it is. I mean, to even get to that point where these people, and like myself, get the strength and courage to say, you know what? I'm at this point now where I need to do this. Like, there's no other option. So as much as this sucks, as much as I don't want to do this, I'm going to take this next step. I'm going to take this leap of faith. And what happens is they go into these offices and they open up, and just like you said, they actually end up traumatizing these therapists. And I mean, it's true. And many of these therapists sit there with their jaws wide open, almost in shock, in disbelief of what we actually have to see and deal with day in and day out over sometimes a 30-year career. And so it is absolutely critical to have a culturally competent therapist or clinician. And, with my experience, when I first went off on injury, I had to go see a work comp doctor, which was a doctor contracted through the city. It was just a general MD. And this doctor told me after I decided to open up, and I didn't open up everything, but I opened up a lot. And this doctor looked at me and said, this is your job. This is what you do. You need to go back to work. That's what you need to do. He said, I'm not going to take you off work. I'm not going to give you any time off. Yeah. And I was like, are you effing kidding me? Like, I literally waited 4 years to finally take this step after literally wanting to kill myself.
Yeah.
And now I have this doctor telling me, no, this is what you do. Suck it up and go back to work. And thank God I used my resources and I called up another clinician, another therapist who was able to get me off work and then get connected with somebody who truly understood what I was going through. And that was the start of my recovery. That's what changed everything for me.
Mm-hmm. Very, very good.
That's very good. It's interesting because as you're talking, it's kind of like, it's like a mirror. It really is, because
read my mind, bro.
Except like,
I have a white beard though, so it's not
way better looking. Way better looking mirror. Yeah. Just as a backstory, Mike, of who you're talking to. So, quite a few years in law enforcement between New York City and then in Virginia. Tried to commit suicide as a police officer. Luckily, obviously, I'm still here. A lot of the traumas that you went to, Mark, very similar. So you're in very good company. And it's interesting about the therapist part, because I remember I really lucked out with the first therapist that I had after trying to commit suicide. Was she had already had experience with first responders.
Good.
And that meant the world to me, because it is so difficult to explain to folks that are not in law enforcement, that don't treat law enforcement or first responders, period, the type of trauma that you go through. Speaking about your book and you writing the book, this is a selfish question for me, because I would love to know what your experience was, if it was the same that I had, which is as you're writing this book and you're putting these thoughts and this trauma on pages, was it almost like re-traumatizing all over again? Or was it therapeutic in the sense that when it was done, it was out? It was like a poison outside of you, spilled out on the page, and kind of was like a breath of fresh air.
It was actually both. So, I had to literally rip open my heart and soul in this project. And when Doc Springer and I started, I went all the way back to childhood and all the way through present day. And I literally had to go to the deepest, darkest depths and relive this trauma in finite detail. And I had to share every single detail with Doc Springer. And so, but here's the beautiful thing, because if I had just done this by myself, I don't think the healing would have been right away. I think it would have come much further, much longer. But being the fact that I had Doc Springer, we would check in before every session and at the end of every session. And I have a relationship with Doc Springer where literally, and during this project as well, where I could text her, I could call her 24/7, and she would drop whatever she was doing to talk to me. And that made this critical difference in this project. And, but to take this a step further, we didn't do the Audible until over a year after the book actually came out. And I regret not doing it sooner for a lot of reasons, but the Audible came out, actually, I think it was like 1 month before being a year. So about 11 months after the book came out, and being in that studio again, reliving this, and I had to feel it. I mean, when we were reading this, I am there. I'm back there in the middle of this trauma. And it needed to be that way, because this isn't like any other Audible that I'm aware of, because literally we are reading literally from our heart and our soul. And I speak for Doc Springer and myself, but this ripped open those wounds again, and it peeled off those scabs. Oh, yeah. And I was absolutely just wiped out. I mean, exhausted at the end of this recording process. But now that it's done, now that it's out there, that's where the healing really comes into play. And when I get messages every single day from readers or listeners about how my story is their story and how it's affected them, it's affected their relationships, it's changed their life, and that's what keeps driving me on this mission. And I am on a mission, and I will never stop this fight.
I'm going to do a real quick follow-up, Dr. Dave, and then I'm going to send it right back to you.
Go, bro.
A year. This book has been out for a year. Your Audible has been out for roughly about like 2 months now, right? Maybe.
No. Let me take a step back. So the book actually came out the end of April 2022.
That's right.
So it's been about a year and a half. And the Audible actually is 14 weeks today that it came out. So exactly
right.
14 weeks today.
Okay, so 14 weeks. I'll tell you this. Fast forward a year from when your Audible gets put out, re-listen to that Audible, and it's going to be an extremely therapeutic moment for you. Because for me, my first book, when I waited a complete year, never read it, didn't read it. Obviously, I wasn't going to read my own book, and I didn't listen to the Audible. I waited a year, and life changes dramatically within that year. When you listen to yourself, especially that you did the Audible, the therapeutic moment that you're going to feel, I can only tell you the joy and the feel that you're going to feel in a year from now is immense. So it's not even really a question. It's more of a comment, because it is something that I do now on a yearly basis on the anniversary of the release, to remind me of where I came from, how far I've come. And it's amazing to listen to your own book, because it's almost like it's not you. It's almost like you didn't write. Like for me, when I listen to mine, it's like, who is this guy? Like, I can't believe I was that screwed up. Like I can't believe that I was that screwed up back then. But it makes me celebrate all of those minor victories along the way. So for you, I mean, super kudos on that. But there's way more to come for you. There is way, way more to come. So it's more of a comment than a question. So, Dr. Dave, I kick it over to your sexy voice.
I want to support very strongly what Nick said, that there's the stories that you tell of your traumatic experiences just in law enforcement, not the military, but just the stuff you'd never told a therapist before that are in the book. When I hear you read those, I hear you being in the story that you're reading. You lose track of the present tense when you're reading that section. You go away, and I can hear you go away. And the passion and the emotion in your voice gets really, to me, very audible. I can hear it, having heard it plenty of times before. You're in that story, and to me, it makes it incredibly compelling to listen to that. I felt this like I'm with you on these runs. There's two in particular that you talked about in the early parts of Relentless Courage. I thought, man, anybody can listen to this and get their socks knocked off. This is powerful. This is first person, and it reinforces my experience with almost the general population. You tell an I story, you're going to get an I story back. You tell a deep I story, you're going to get a deeper I story back. People want the opportunity, and you took advantage of the opportunity, and I could hear your own work, your own healing as you read and talked about those stories. So congratulations for having the balls to do that, because I know that's hard for anybody to go through, man. Well, I've got like half a dozen things here that really tweaked me hard when I listened to your stuff, and one of them, I want to just real briefly, you were in the military for how long, Michael?
6.5 years active duty.
And what did you do, just generally speaking? What was that 6.5 years like for you?
Honestly, it was the best time of my life. Like, my biggest regret is actually getting out of the military. And I look back at just the different assignments I had, being all over the world, the responsibilities I had, the people that I worked with. There's camaraderie among first responders and law enforcement, but I have to tell you, it was completely different in the military. I felt so much closer and so much more connected to those that I served with. And I can't explain why, but I can just tell you that that's how it was. And it's, again, one of my biggest regrets, if anybody's out there listening, is I wish I would have at least stayed in the reserve side. So I was going to get off active duty regardless, but I wish I would have stayed in the reserves. And I've got some buddies that did that, and they're still in. One just retired, and they had dual careers in civilian law enforcement and the military. And when they tell me the stories of the things they've done and they continue to do, it's like, oh man, I'm missing out. I'm missing out big time.
The sense listening to you talk about that is like, man, that was a really beautiful set of 6.5 years, man. I mean, like, you walked out of the military with a smile on your face, right?
I did. Huge smile.
Yeah.
I mean, huge smile.
And so then
and
it was different as a law enforcement person. I mean, that was so struck by 6.5 years doing what you did, and we just get a flavor of it in the book, but law enforcement culture isn't anything like what you just described in the military. What was that like to have that contrast in culture?
Very interesting. So I can tell you, like, from day one, what really stands out to me is, and I don't want to say this part was toxic, but I worked for a medium-sized department in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it seems like so cutthroat and so competitive. Like every assignment, every promotion opportunity, like literally you felt like everybody was just in this mosh pit and everybody was fighting and trying to get the next thing. And it was just like, I didn't feel this like camaraderie and this teamwork. Whereas the military, I never had that sense. I didn't have it with the people that I supervised. I didn't have it with my peers. I didn't have it with my superiors. And in civilian law enforcement, I felt that it was much more like cliquish and much more, how do I say, like part of the good old boy network. And if you want this or you want that, you've got to align with this person, or you've got to align with that person. And I'll say it right here, but at some point in many agencies, you literally have to sell your soul if you want to get to lieutenant or above. And I'm going to put it out there right now. If you want to be lieutenant or above, and I'm not saying in all cases, but in many cases, you have to screw over a lot of people or sell your soul to get there. And that was not the case in the military.
Nick's rubbing hands. I'm rubbing hands. We're all nodding. For those of us that are not watching this on YouTube,
this is my favorite part.
You can watch it on YouTube on RCR. So, okay, since I haven't had a chance yet, let me go ahead and jump in here real quick. The department I came from was 20 men. It was Walnut Grove, correct? Is where you were? Walnut Creek. I'm sorry. Walnut Grove.
Oh, no worries. That's a different area.
Wrong show.
But yeah, right.
Walnut Creek, and how big was it again? How many officers? We
had, I think at the time, like 86, 89 sworn, and we had like 125 personnel altogether.
Yeah. So, and this is things we've talked about on this show before, and also on RCR, was that align yourself, and when you're talking about, you got to sell your soul, or who you're aligning yourself with at the department, and what I like to say is, like, give a little pushback one time, see how that works for you. It's how much of a Kool-Aid drinker, to talk about Gehenna and Georgetown, how big of a Kool-Aid drinker are you? How much have you bought into the current administration, really decides on where you're going to go. And if you've had a long time chief that's a bit of a tyrant, so you either adhere to the king, kiss the ring of the king, or you're not going to get promotion. Thank goodness my first chief wasn't that way. He was fair all the way across the board. It was really difficult going from a leader like that to what I got next. So so as you're saying those stories, Michael, it's amazing to me. You're West Coast, Nick is East Coast. We're Ohio and Central America. So it's literally same department, different patch. And it's the sad thing about it is that why are we that way as a nation? Why are all these police departments basically the same way? And I'm not saying all of them are there, and it's good to put out there that, some people have a really good and positive experience.
Right.
And for you people, salute and be thankful where you are. But, I guess it's sad to me to hear the same story over and over. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, I don't know what any of you are talking about. I had a fantastic experience. I'm gonna flip it, Mike, because You know, I like to be the stirrer of things. I mean, you're in the same line of business that we're in. When I say the same line of business, which is saving lives of our former law enforcement and current law enforcement officers, even the ones that don't know that they need saving. So I'm in that business. Used to save lives as a police officer. Now I'm doing it outside. And I think anybody that's in our line of business understands that there's a mental health crisis within law enforcement right now. It's more prevalent than it's ever been before. Amen. Over 20 years in law enforcement, I've never seen it as bad as it is now. We're losing more to suicide than we are to line of duty thefts. My question, and you can take the political way out of this if you want, or just point it over to me. Do you see? And I'm giving that out only because I don't want to put Mike on the spot.
Right.
Are you seeing a correlation of the mental health crisis and poor law enforcement leadership as a whole as that catalyst for the mental health epidemic that we have right now within law enforcement?
I think it's a huge part of it. And I think to go back to, really George Floyd incident. And when that happened, and I can tell you out here in California that we had some chiefs who were literally kneeling down in uniform in front of angry mobs and protesters who were throwing river rocks and destroying property and, catering to this stuff instead of sticking up for their officers and for our mission. And, the fact is that we have brave men and women who go out there every single day, leave their loved ones and their family knowing they may not come back home, literally putting their lives on the line for complete strangers. And you've got these people who are just politicians who are worried about their next chief job or whether they're going to be the city manager or the mayor. They're going to move up, and you don't have leaders anymore. You've got these people who are puppets of either the city manager, the city council, or the county or the state, and literally they're puppets. They're at will, and they know if they don't go along or get along, they're going to lose their job, and they don't want to stick their neck out for their people, because that right there, that's what saves lives.
Yes.
When you've got a leader who's going to stick up for their people, and people see that, I mean, it's no different than the military or law enforcement. A leader is a leader, and people follow true leaders.
Yes,
they will go to bat. They'll go to battle. They'll sacrifice everything for a true leader. And we have a few true leaders, but the majority, that's not the case. They're literally placeholders, literally worried about losing their job, not ruffling feathers, not making waves, just literally riding this wave until they can get their, what do they call that? Their vested retirement. So they can get their fourth retirement, making six figures and go away quietly, not worried about how many people die under their watch.
Right.
And that's a sad reality. I mean, I know out here in California, I'm not going to say the agency, but this happened last Christmas. There was a sergeant who went on duty in the locker room and shot himself. Okay.
Oh my God.
That chief now works for another agency in another position,
Of course he does.
And
well,
but
go ahead. I'm sorry.
But what are our leaders doing to truly address this? I mean, the thing is, when something happens, some step up and actually do something, but most just try to wipe it under the rug, not put it out there, not let anybody hear about it, and just go on with their business. And that's costing lives.
Exactly.
I get excited because, one of the things that we talk about heavily on the Roll Call Room podcast, and I say it all the time, is that these chiefs get passed around like a peace pipe.
Well, you said a truck stop pour the other day, but
I did. I've toned it down.
That's a better.
That's true.
No more Facebook suspensions, okay? And here's the thing. And again, this is more. We're just kind of more having an open discussion, which is that. At the height of the anti-police movement, we were hearing national registry for officers, national registry to follow them around from place to place. but there isn't one for chiefs of police. Matter of fact, the more departments that you jump from each one makes you more marketable as a chief of police, which I think is so despicable. It's like it's basically like being a prostitute. You move from place to place to place, and all you're doing is they're doing these 3-year commitments at a department with a vested retirement, like you said, and then they go on to another department, and then they fuck that up for 3 years, and then they move on to another department, and then they move them around. And then when you see these major incidences happen, like in Philadelphia and Chicago,
Memphis,
and you see these chiefs, Memphis is a great example. The Memphis 6. So
6, yeah.
Memphis 5. So yeah, 6, 5, whatever they want to prosecute today. But you look and you realize that this chief was over at another department and got kicked out of that department. So it's interesting because the folks like you and me and Mark that are former, we can talk about that stuff. But the folks that are still on the job, it's taboo. You're not allowed to talk about poor law enforcement leadership. I was a sergeant just like you. My department was 305 sworn, so fairly decent sized department. And the politics in it was, like you said, that's why I was chomping at the bit to speak, because it is that way. You have to wait for somebody to veer off the road and die to get that next promotion, or you have to be the one to cut the tire before they take off and go home, so that they do veer off the road. It is so competitive and it's so cutthroat, and especially now these days, you have officers selling each other out with citizen complaints or making bogus complaints. It's so sad. And then you look at where the suicide or the mental health epidemic is climbing, and you have like the IACP that holds conferences, and they're scratching their head and they're going, we don't know where this crisis is coming from. Meanwhile, everybody that's in the room is who they should be discussing, which is the chiefs of police. So I went on this tangent, Mike. I'm so sorry. But
it's a worthy tangent. And kind of the question for the both of you, we're all stripes here. I was a sergeant, Nick's a sergeant, Michael, you were a sergeant. So don't you, and it seems like the trend when we were talking about, like the chief of Memphis got fired in Atlanta. I think she was a lieutenant there. But doesn't it seem like the worst ones, like getting fired from the former agency, seems to be like, ooh, we need to give her an extra gold star because she's super hireable at this point. I mean, at any other job, if I'd have got fired and I came in there from my previous job and I came in there with all these credentials, I don't know if I'm living in kind of a fucked up world, and maybe Dr. David being from the civilian side, you can jump in. Isn't that like a bad thing?
Yes.
I mean, seriously.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, man.
All right, Dave, you have to ask a real question. It's
kind of like
peppered Mike with nonsense.
You came out of the military having had a very supportive, intimate, I would call, culture, into law enforcement where it was competitive, backstabbing, and for me, that adds up to a word I think is very powerful, and that's betrayal. Oh, yeah. So I'm thinking, you walk into this culture, and you're not a part of that culture. That culture's been there a long-ass time before you walked in the room, right? So, like, your background being so warm and supportive and intimate into this that's like, oh, my God, I got to look over my right shoulder, my left shoulder, the mirror on the... You got to be aware of everything around you all the time. How did you keep that culture from enveloping you?
You know, that's a good question. I think when I first started off, you know, you're so new and you're so eager and you're so chomping at the bit that literally just getting that patrol car by yourself when you get off FTO, you're so excited. You're living the dream. Oh, yeah. You know, you're getting paid well for the first time in your life, and you're working tons of overtime. And I think in the beginning, you're not really seeing that part of the job. You're literally just so involved and so sucked into the adrenaline rush and the excitement of the job. And I don't think you really get exposed to that or realize it until you go out for your first assignment or additional duty, you know, whether that's a field training officer or like driver instructor or detective or SWAT or whatever the thing is that you want to do. I think that's the very first time in our careers that we typically experience that stuff. And I can remember, you know, like I was a real go-getter. I was real proactive. I pissed the dispatchers off because I would do like 30 stops a shift. I worked graveyard, you know, 2 rests a night, like 15 tickets a day. And I remember like when I was applying for field training officer, they're like, Michael, you know, you're a good officer and you know the job and you outperform everybody on the team, but like you need to go hang out and dispatch and you need to become friends with them and you need to let them see your likable side and, you know, just go out there and hang out and talk to them and get to know you and, you know, be personal. And it was just like I really felt like I was trying to not be me, right? It's like, well, I got to check this box because you're telling me that if I want to be an FTO, like even though I meet all the requirements and I'm a damn good officer, there's these little things that annoy you or don't make everybody happy. And Michael, we need you to make everybody happy in the department. And so you need to go do these things. And so, you know, initially I did those things. I'll be honest with you. Like I was like, okay, this is bullshit, but you're asking me to do this and I want this next step. So I'm going to play along and I'm going to go do this. And I did that. And I was before this white beard.
Oh, there you go.
You know, it's more the care homes and the senior
I want to grow a beard. I'm the only one here. Sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
But you know, that's the reality when you get this glimpse, and that's where it slowly, I think, starts to build. And as you move up or these different assignments, there's more things that you're going to have to do or more boxes that you're going to have to check. And it's really unfortunate, you know, instead of, I remember thinking like, you know, like I was an expert in narcotics and I was an expert in certain fields, but they want you to be this well-rounded, perfect person who, you know, is supposedly good at everything instead of just recognizing you for what you're good at. And it's like, why don't we put people where they thrive, where they excel, where they enjoy doing the job instead of making them do all this frivolous bullshit, you know, to get promoted or to get these special assignments. I mean, it's a waste of time.
You know, that's interesting, Mike, because I remember putting in for sergeant and I remember having the same conversation from my lieutenant and my captain and saying, you know, the stuff that you do in patrol, you're going to have to cut that out. You know that, right? Like you're not going to be allowed to go out and go stop people and make traffic stops. And I remember thinking to myself, and again, I was the same as you. I had my eye on exactly what I wanted to do and nothing was going to compromise that. So I ate it. Didn't mean that I followed it because then when I became sergeant, I was doing traffic stops. And then I would get called in the captain's office and go, you know, we don't need you on traffic stop. We need you to lead your people. And I would say, what do you think I'm doing?
Yeah, you lead from the front.
I'm leading my people to I'm leading my people by showing them, hey, Sarge is out there doing traffic stops.
Yes.
Sarge is getting drugs off the street. Well, you're tying yourself up. And when I was a sergeant, there were 3 other sergeants on the same shift, and they did that purposefully. So it was a very weird thing. So hearing you say that, it's interesting because you're in California. I'm right outside of DC. Totally same screwed up thing. So it's interesting to hear.
Well, the funny thing is, like, you just brought that back to me now because that happened with me. Like when I was that brand new sergeant, I was out there, you know, still doing stops, still making arrests. And many times I was leading my entire patrol team. And I got in trouble multiple times, but it's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like I'm driving around being visible. I'm still doing all these other things you want me to do. And I'm making felony arrests on top of it because I see some turd driving by me that needs service. But you want me to have blinders on and not do anything. And it's like, no, I'm a cop. I'm going to do cop stuff. Like I'm going to lead. I'm going to do everything else, and I'm still going to take care of business. I can do both.
So isn't it amazing?
And it's interesting.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how those above, you know, they want to, you know, what's the number one complaint that I hear in my world or in my orbit is, where's the stripe? The stripe is off doing something, meaning the sergeant, you know, all these major incidences that happen, you know, All of them. There was no management on board. Where's the stripes at? And Nick and I have talked about this, and we mentioned it here on the Shield Within. Where's the managers at? So those of us that are proactive, I was the same way. I held my same standards as I did my crew. Traffic stops, regular arrest. Trying to be a good, well-rounded officer. Like they tell you. But I always believed in leading from the front. So the three of us all have that same vibe. And I think the three of us have all had that same talking to by our superiors was, you need to slow down. You need to take a back seat. And I'm the same way as you are, Mike. I'm like, what the fuck you want me to do? I see a fucking car. I'm going to stop the goddamn thing. I'm proactive. That's what proactive means. And when you're proactive, you're going to step on your hoo-hoo every once in a while. You're going to get in that fight. You're going to drop that F-bomb. And, with my boss, we were the first ones in the area after Ferguson to get body cameras. So it went from, the body camera's going to vindicate the officer. Well, he quickly turned that around to, he wanted the supervisors doing audits, in case you're swearing or not doing things by policy. I'm like, fuck that. That's not what the heck the thing is for. So quickly I realized that, I see where we're going with this. But I don't understand, it must be something in management training, I call it, because it's not leadership training. True leaders, go do your shit, man. Just keep doing what you're doing. We'll take care of it from here. Right. But the officers really appreciate that. I know for a long time after my incident, I didn't do shit because I was afraid to. But once I realized when I had my retirement date in sight, I rolled up the sleeves and went out and fucking turned it on. My guys were like, God damn, Sarge, what the hell's got into you? And I said, I told you motherfuckers, I'll arrest circles around you fuckers. I've forgotten more about law enforcement than you guys currently know. So we're in good company tonight, Dr. David, with all three sergeants here that loved going out and working the road. Right. When it was good, it was good. I mean, right, gentlemen? Yeah. But when it was bad.
Yeah, but I think that's why, like, when you look at the George Floyd incident, I think that what I saw differently, and we've talked about it on the RCR so many times, I think I looked at it very differently. While everybody was looking at Chevette with his knee on the control hold, I was more looking at the scene of where was the white shirts.
Yes.
During that whole entire thing, and Mike, this is your first time hearing it. It's something that bothers me still to this day. You were a sergeant. Mark was a sergeant. I was a sergeant. You know how your people sound on the radio. And you can't tell me that Chevette and those three rookies' voices weren't so high like Mickey Mouse that you didn't grab your radio and run out of the office or Starbucks or wherever those sergeants and lieutenants were. So again, I credit a lot of that incident to poor leadership because there was nobody on scene running that scene. It was like the rookies running the scene while Chevette had full reign to do whatever he wanted as the primary, and rightfully so. As the primary officer, he is going to dictate what happens. But I didn't see any sergeants show up on scene or lieutenants saying, hey, sit him up, go get him water, get him in the back of the cruiser and get him out of here. Get an ambulance here, something. So for me, that incident just is the pillar of what we were talking about, which is that there is a delicate balance, but you don't have to be castrated once you get stripes or a butter bar.
Right.
I think quite the opposite. And I think that's the start of leadership starts at the sergeant rank.
Go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead. I'll say what I think is really interesting, and it's related to both these things that we're talking about, is that, and I remember this for myself, is that, I was on the street like 90% of the time. So I was out there, I was available, whether I was being proactive or not. But what they started doing was they wanted sergeants to start doing the lieutenant's job. So we started doing IA investigations, right? Or like use of force, policy inquiries, or like you're saying, like we didn't have body cameras back then, but now they do it, like review body camera footage. So you're telling us one thing, but you've got us stuck in the station doing the job of lieutenants and captains when the sergeants need to be physically out on the streets. And that's why I was always out on the street 90% of the time. That's why in my incident, I was the first one there before any patrol officer.
Yes.
And that was my thing, is like, so you can't have it both ways. It's like, do you want sergeants on the street because that's where we need them? Or do you want us in the office doing the job of lieutenants and captains while who knows what you guys are doing? That's the reality of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I venture it's gotten worse since we've all left, because now we're hearing, and we talked about it, I think last episode or the episode before, that one particular body cam company now has live view. So these sergeants and lieutenants can dial into your body cam live without you knowing and watch what you're doing in real time. They don't have to wait for it to upload to the cloud. So I would venture to say that we're in this anti-police climate now where I think sergeants and lieutenants are really hard, like they're really stuck in the office now. Every single citizen complaint, because correct me if I'm wrong, Mark and Mike, there were some citizen complaints that I used to be able to deflect, and I used to say, we're not looking into that. I'm sorry, your feelings being hurt is not an II investigation. I venture to say now, they investigate everything. I mean, shoot, I'm investigated and I'm not even at my department anymore. You know.
Well, Michael, I really connected with the book when you were talking about you were the first there on the scene, because there's several incidents throughout my career that were one time we were going to a fight where supposedly one guy was taking a ball bat to the other, and I'm like, fuck yeah, so I'm blasting to the scene. My officer that's ahead of me makes a full and complete stop at a 4-way stop. It's like 3:00 in the morning. I almost ass-packed the officer. I passed them and ended up first on scene. And when we got done, I told the officers, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? You don't stop at that shed. Well, you passed.
He said, sucker.
I'm sorry?
He said, sucker.
Yeah, sucker. Yeah. It's like, look, I'm going to go have the fun. You're taking the paper, fucker. But I totally related to that, to being the first one on the scene. I think all three of us as supervisors and as frontline sergeants all related with that. And, I know there's sergeants out there that are doing it. I hear from them all the time through social media. They're sending me messages, especially when we strike that nerve, like we did in our last episode of RCR. So we're still getting lots of feedback off of that. But, and it's great. I'm really pleased that we're having this conversation tonight, because you got three separate agencies of all different sizes from across the nation that have that same attitude as far as it comes to managing law enforcement. And I truly hope and pray that those sergeants like us are still out there on the job. Go ahead.
Well, and here's a good question for you too, because we haven't thrown a question at you in probably 20 minutes, Mike.
Been rambling.
I thought you guys forgot. Yeah, I was like,
who's interviewing who?
And I'll ask you this, which is I remember releasing my book. I did a whole bunch of different podcasts, different shows here and there. Are you seeing, and you don't have to throw anybody under the bus, again, these are controversial questions I like to ask. You've been on multiple shows. Are there any topics that are being discussed like this on other shows that you have been on, or are they kind of just staying off of the third rails? They're not really touching on that. And this is no dig on them, because trust me, I was there where I couldn't say anything. I had a podcast while I was a cop. Stupid idea, but I did it. Are you seeing on podcasts things being addressed that should be addressed, which is the poor law enforcement leadership and the correlation of poor law enforcement leadership to the suicide epidemic or the mental health epidemic? Are you seeing that, or is it more of like informational podcasts?
So I've been on probably over 70 podcasts all over the world. Yeah, I mean, a lot. Australia, UK, Canada, the US. And I started these long before my book came out. But to answer your question, I would say less than 1% of all podcasts are really getting down to the real issues. But here's the issue, to be frank with you, because I think, first of all, many people are still working in the industry, and so they're not going to talk about this stuff openly. I'm retired. I don't work at all. I do speak, but I also understand that my book, and I thought this was going to be very controversial, It talks a lot about admin betrayal or institutional betrayal, but what I found is it's the number one thing in my book that is resonating with everybody, no matter what country you're in.
Yes.
That is the one theme that everybody can relate to, but nobody talks about. And it's kind of like that ugly elephant in the room, right? Because when Doc Springer and I wrote this book, we were thinking like, trauma and the horrible things we see and suicide. And the fact is, it's the admin betrayal and institution betrayal. That's what pushes officers over the edge. It's not the horrible things we see on the streets, but it's when what we thought was our blue family turns their back on us and leaves us out on an island. That's when officers kill themselves. 100%. And like you said, it is the number one killer of all first responders. And we are much more likely to die by our own hands than the hands of some assailant on the street.
Yes.
That is a fact. And so that's the thing is we need to talk about this stuff. And I'm the kind of guy where in the book, when I speak on interviews, I tell people, I don't want to know questions ahead of time. You ask me anything and everything, nothing's off the table, and I will answer everything. And so I do that. And what's interesting is like, depending when I go speak on certain audiences, sometimes nobody will ask a question, but sometimes somebody will open up Pandora's box and then it starts, right? And that's that's what I love, because it's like, hey, I'm up here. I got nothing to lose. I'm not trying to get a job.
Right.
I'm going to tell you this truth. But I think that's why my book and my story resonates with so many people, because my story honestly isn't special or unique. It's just that I'm willing to talk about it, all of it, without sugarcoating it and without bullshit. Like to say, this is the reality of how it is out there.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is Roll Call Room podcast, when we started it, that was the reason why we started it. There was nobody talking about, and when I say nobody, Mark, you could chime in.
Oh, absolutely.
You were a fan.
Yeah.
He was a fan first.
A
then
boy.
He was. And I've dropped more co-hosts than any other podcast.
Right. He's the mic dropper.
And it's interesting because when I look at our listenership and I look at it, over 40,000 listens per episode. That's not by coincidence. These are officers across the world. And same as you with your book, we'll get folks that'll write in and they're like, I'm a cop in London. I'm a cop in Florida. I'm a cop in Canada. It's the same shit everywhere. The difference is that when we hit record and we start talking about stuff, we're hitting on nerves. Like when we talk about the IACP putting their head in the sand, we got a lot of shit for that. A lot of shit for that.
Oh yeah.
We've talked about organizations that are supposed to be helping prevent law enforcement suicides.
Wait, I got to tell you something real quick. I got to stop you on this.
Do it.
You guys you're gonna love this.
Okay.
I'm not going to go into details. So I don't know, a year and a half ago, I got this really big speaking gig in another state. I'm not going to say what state. And it was all set up. Everything was lined up. They had like flyers made. I'm promoting it all over the internet. And it turns out that somebody at IACP decided that they didn't like what I was doing. So they went to this person in this state. They didn't know me. They've never seen me speak. And they tried to kibosh my speaking engagement. And so literally this person hit me up and they're like, hey, I'm sorry to do this to you. I know it's only a month and a half out, but somebody talked to somebody and they said this and that. And I said, well, look, hold up. I said, let me just tell you, that's not who I am. I don't badmouth anybody. I don't bash anybody. That's not what I do. Here's what I do. And thank God this person did their due diligence, because they followed up with like 30 different people. They reached out to people I didn't know, and I ended up speaking. But my point is that somebody there tried to ruin my entire speaking career because they didn't like what I was doing and what I was saying, because I was speaking the truth. And that's the reality of what's going on out there.
That's right.
Look at the shocked look on my face, Mike. Look at the shocked look.
Right?
It doesn't listen. The FBI National Academy, we did a small stint on them on the show, and I had 15 FBI agents hit my LinkedIn because I was talking about the National Academy. I talk about the IACP. You know, they're at their conference right by you. Actually, they're doing their conference right now, and
I was invited to speak. Can you believe it?
I can't believe it.
I'm glad you chose us over them.
I'm waiting for my invitation. Listen, I'm waiting for my invitation. That's never going to come from them. And the reality is, until you want to invite folks like me and you and Mark to get in a room with chiefs and say, listen, I'm going to give you the root cause of why we have more law enforcement suicides than we do line of duty deaths. And do a really awkward pause.
Oh, yeah.
It's in this room.
Yeah.
And they don't want to hear it. What they want to do is they want to print out certificates and make acrylic plaques and give each other circle jerks all day long and tell themselves that they're doing such a fantastic job. And they're not. Because in the current job that I have right now, if I was rated on the stats that law enforcement has when it comes to law enforcement suicide, I'd be out of a job.
Yeah.
But we don't.
Yes.
What we do is we say, well, it's the anti-police movement. That's what's causing all of this mental health problems.
No,
it's not. Because listen, when I had the gun in my hand in my mouth on the corner of my bed, it wasn't the dead children. It wasn't the decapitated child that I saw. It wasn't the person who was burning alive in a truck. It was 100% the retaliation and poor leadership from my department. It had nothing to do with any of the horrific shit that I saw.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That's a huge, huge problem. And you've had people you have had people reach out to you after reading your book and say, I was you. That was me. I've been through that. And until folks like you and I who are on the job start talking about it in roll calls, I fear it's not going to change. I really do. And that's a sad thing.
Michael, you talked about, that betrayal from management. You know, I had the same thing with my story. I'm working on my book. Nick has challenged me to get it done this year. But
awesome.
Kick his ass, Mike.
Yes.
Kick his ass.
and sitting here around the table with two very successful authors, it is motivating me to get my story done. It's unique in its own way, but the betrayal side of it, and I always cite, Braveheart, at the second battle when the other tribes abandon, William Wallace on the battlefield, and that's how I felt when my administration basically served me up. And here you go. I felt like I was being run feet first through a wood chipper. And it's a feeling that very few of us have. Sadly, we're in that club. I had another officer from my former agency go through a very traumatic experience, very similar. But a lot of people, why don't you get over it? Why are you feeling this way? And I'm like, until you've lived that, until you went through it, and you did a really good job. And I listened to the Audible book too. Matter of fact, I commented a few times on your social media, hurry up and get the damn thing done or something like that. And you'd liked or whatever, you'd responded to it because I kept checking every day with Audible. It's like, is this goddamn thing done yet? And as soon as it was, man, bought it. And, I drive 45 minutes each day. I'm a trainer. I work for the state. So I have a lot of good, I got through the book fairly quick. And I enjoyed every minute of it. But we are in a club that very few of us are in. And I shouldn't say that now. So what I'm hearing from you as well as Nick and others that write into our show is how much of this is out here. And so for you chiefs that are listening in, have a good listen to this, because if you're wondering what recruiting is like, we're podcasting telling everyone how bad this is. All right. You need to take and the question is, do you agree with this or not? The long look in the mirror needs to be coming from those people in the corner office. Do you agree with that, Michael, or no? Go ahead with your answer.
No, 100%. No, you hit the nail on the head. The only thing I disagree with, but you clarified, is that actually I would say a majority of officers out there are feeling like we're feeling. It's the thing is that we're ordered not to talk about it when we're on the job. And that's the thing is, like, we're all going through it and we're all getting screwed over, but nobody knows it because we've all been ordered not to talk about it. And my biggest regret with the book is that I didn't go more into the admin betrayal and the institutional betrayal, because and I'll be honest,
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's gonna be a whole book just on that. So, but that, and I was a little leery, like thinking like, how is, what are people going to think about this? Because, people are going to say, oh, this guy is just complaining or disgruntled. It's like, no, I'm not. I mean, that's not me, right? I'm like,
you're right.
And the thing is, it's like, but it's reality. It's the truth. And so it's like, it had to be balanced, but it needed to come out and say, this is a reality. And because of this almost caused me to kill myself.
Yes.
I mean, there's no mystery about that. It's like, it's a direct correlation. There's a direct link, and it's like, and I don't want to give the book away, but it's almost like you can't believe this shit when you're reading it, but yet people can, because they're going through it themselves.
Yes.
And that's why it's resonating with so many people, is because this is reality. It isn't just me. It isn't just my story. Everyone listening to this, or vast majority of people listening to this interview right now, are saying, me too. Me too, as we're talking.
Welcome to our listenership, Mike. But I will tell you this: I'm gonna have my agent reach out to your agent. I officially this last book was my last book, but I am willing to make an exception. We should partner up and write a betrayal book together.
Let's start.
I would ask Mark.
Do it.
Yeah. I would ask Mark, but he won't stop writing his book with a crayon. That's why it's taking so long.
But it's a blue crayon.
But it's interesting that you had that feeling about is this out of anger or bitterness or any of that stuff, because we struggle with that on the RCR all the time, because some of the feedback that we get back from captains, my old department, which I heavily I value their opinions so much, they'll write in and say, you're just so bitter, get over it. And it's not coming from bitterness. It is a form of therapy doing these shows and you writing your book, you coming on these shows. All it takes is for one person who's going through that to hear you on a podcast, and they're going to turn around and be like, man, me too. That's what I'm going through. Yes. And one of the reasons why we were so adamant on having you on was because the listenership, our reach is just so large at this point, that it would be a huge injustice not to have you on and put you in front of all of those folks, the folks that are listening to this. And the majority of our listenership is on midnights. That's our majority of our listenership. The most disgruntled shift,
That's how I worked most of my career. I love Graveyard Shift.
I love Graveyard. I loved it. It was the greatest time of my life, but now I can't stay up past 8:30. So
it's because you're oldest.
I can stay up past that.
Life has beaten me down. I'm going to ask one more question, Mike, and I think we're going to wrap it up. If you can go back in time and you're a sergeant on the shift, and you had the ability to go to roll calls, all the roll calls for one day, what would the piece of advice for you now, after leaving, if you had the ability to go back in time, what would be the advice that you would give everybody in that roll call, or words of wisdom that you would give them?
There's a couple parts to this, but I would first off say, don't make the mistakes that I made. One of the biggest mistakes that I made early on, I mean, this was while I was in the police academy, is I told myself I would never bring work home. I would never talk about the job, because I thought by doing that, I was protecting my family or my loved ones. And in reality, I was creating a division, and I wasn't building that support system that I needed. Yes. And so what I would encourage anybody to do is say, look, just talk about this shit. It doesn't have to be a big deal. We don't have to make this some big dilemma. We don't need like a therapist, a clinician, a critical incident debrief. We need to be able to trust each other and just have these conversations in the locker room when we're parked, side to side in our patrol cars. We're having a cup. Like, let's be our real selves. Because you know what? We are badasses. We go out there and we take care of business every freaking single day. But you know what? Acknowledging the shittiness of what we have to do and the humanity of what we see and deal with day in, day out, it's going to take a toll. Mm-hmm. But if we can just get it off our chest as it's happening and just be real about how we're feeling. I'm not talking about like, just all emotional and breaking down. I mean, sometimes, yeah, that's going to happen. I'm just talking about get that shit off your chest.
Yes.
Stop keeping it in. Because if you let it bottle up and build and build and build, you're going to get to where I got. And that was where I didn't want to be here anymore. I literally wanted to kill myself.
Yep.
You don't have to be me. You don't have to be there. Just talk about it, share it, get it off your chest.
That's awesome. Mark and team over there, I'm going to turn it over to you. Any last minute parting words for our great guest that we had?
Dr. David, go ahead.
Everybody listening needs to pick up Relentless Courage. And I encourage
100%.
everybody to listen to the book rather than read the book because it's so powerful having the words read to you by the people that are writing them. And by Michael experiencing these events that he describes, telling you about them, you can hear it in his voice, you can feel it in your heart.
Oh, yeah.
You're with him as he goes through these stories. It's very powerful. And there's a lot in there to learn about being a law enforcement person. But I found it relates on a general level to who you are as a person, regardless of your career or what letters you have before, after, under, above your name, whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we all go through stuff, and acknowledging that we're going through stuff is really powerful. And being able to share that with people around us and have that support that's going to come from them is really powerful. And when you're working in a situation where the organization around you does not support you, which is, in my experience, way more common than not, regardless of your profession, then you have to find a way, and this is what to me was so powerful, one of the many things powerful about Relentless Courage is, none of you three, Mark, Nick, Michael, got swallowed up and became a part of that culture. You found something within yourself that you utilized to say, no, I am not going to be a part of that world. That is not who I am. And to me, that realization, and then you implement it by not being a part of that culture, refusing to be a part of that culture. No, not going to happen. That to me is as much about relentless courage as anything about suicide, trauma, and the things you go through in law enforcement. I feel the culture around me. I see it 24/7. And I will not be a part of that shit.
Well said. Well, gentlemen,
Amen.
all three of us here have a very similar story. I didn't really come out and say about my previous suicide attempts. My first one, and shortly after that's when I met Dr. David, and you and I were together, how long?
A long time.
Yeah, a long time, 8 years or so. And then David bailed on me and went to Florida. But anyway, not that I'm bitter. But lots changed since then. But, I'm very proud to be sharing a studio and a microphone with him now and help bringing that healing in. So, Nick, you were talking about writing a book. I think we should come up with our own version of the Blue Collar Comedy Tour. I think the three of us Stripes should go out, do like the Blue Line Comedy Tour. And we should all three get together and go speak, because we all have a very similar story. And if you're listening to this, write into our social media, go on LinkedIn. I know Michael has a big presence on LinkedIn and Facebook. Nick and I do with the Roll Call Room, as well as David and I do with the Shield Within. If you're listening to this, reach out. Is this something you guys would want to listen to? Because I would be damn honored to be on the stage with these two gentlemen. Three sergeants and a therapist or whatever. Michael, one question really quick before we go. Have you and Doc Springer done an interview together since then? Since the book's come out?
We have. We've actually done a couple interviews, yes.
Cool. When we get done here, if you could text me those, because I'd like to listen to them. What David and I was would kind of have liked to have done was had all of us on the same time. But I didn't communicate that with you earlier. But having both therapists and both people going through, or all of us that have gone through that traumatic experience and having that end of it, and kind of what we do on the Shield Within is to experience. People can experience what therapy's like, and you really put it in a book form. And that's one thing I really enjoyed about the book was that you were relating the story, and then she came in and said, "This is what's happening." Mentally, this is what, Michael's going through. This is the experience. And I thought, wow, man, this is just like blowing me away. And I remember one morning I text David and I'm like, dude, you got to listen to this book. And I sent him the link. And, so thankful that, you had downloaded and listened to it. But great job on the book. Thank you. Thank you so much for us finally being able to get together and do this. It's such an honor and a pleasure to meet you, and an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. Yeah, Nick, go ahead. Close this out.
Likewise.
Well, and I'm gonna close it out, which is if you have bought the audiobook, I would encourage you to go ahead and buy a hard copy and send it or bring it into work as a Battle Buddy gift.
Yes.
It's one thing that I encouraged with my book when I put it out, which was, if you enjoyed the book, keep the book. Get another book. It has nothing to do with the sales of the book. It has to do with get it into the arms of somebody that needs it. And I think that's where we fail. The company that I'm at right now is big into that, which is buy a book, send a book, which is leadership books. That's why the company I work for has some great leaders, because we're always passing books around. So I wanted to say that. Go on Amazon or anywhere where books are sold. You can find Mike's book, but Audible, for those of you that travel a lot, like me and Mark, it's a great Audible book. Absolutely amazing. Mike, I want to thank you for your time coming in tonight, and lots of luck to you, man.
Yes.
Thank you. I had a blast. Honestly, this was a good time. So, I mean, this is very different than other interviews. I've had a great time, and we need to do it again. Let's do it again.
Absolutely, awesome. Anytime. Yes, we would love to do this.
We need to do part two, and hopefully this time Mark's hemorrhoids aren't acting up, because that was a.
Well, I am on my side on my wedge pillow, so I not so much pressure this time.
Yeah. Oh, I wasn't supposed to say anything.
Right.
I wasn't supposed to say anything. I'm sorry, bro. I'm sorry.
Hey,
I am so sorry.
What's that clamoring noise there in the background? Is your hooker trying to get out of the bathroom again?
All right, everybody, have a good night.
May your days and nights find you strong and safe. May you take your place as your family's face. As you do the shit that we won't do. As you embrace the risk you must go through. May you grow in strength and heal and find your heart, your soul, and your mind. You look at your life and grin. You have a home, the Shield Within.